Caroline, I'll let you talk, and then I'll just see if I can fit anything after.
Okay. Yeah, I'm interested in that comment about the narcissism of the academic personality. That, yeah, I think that the tendency to hang back with research and critique. Well, first of all, it's just part of disciplinary training, and habits just have to change, and it takes time for habits to change. But I think there's also this kind of fetishization of doing things thoroughly and slowly that only academics can do. And I think that's a desire to control knowledge and control your production of knowledge. Because, like, as Todd was saying, if you start tweeting, then you are almost certainly going to say something that you regret, or that someone's going to call you out for, in a way that doesn't happen in the stately pace that we use for our scholarship, where we're controlling so much of what we do and how we say it. Yeah, we have to get over that, because again, like, whenever I start a new semester and I'm sent into the classroom and we're spending time in all our meetings and curriculum committee and making sure that we have our learning objectives clearly stated on our syllabus, blah, blah, blah. It's like, tell me why we're doing this and why we don't just, like, walk out the door collectively right now and start planting some trees. Because, like, in terms of the usefulness of our actions in the next 5 to 20 years, the trees are going to matter a whole lot more than what I'm doing on the dead residue of them in my course, my course outline. So yeah, I think we have, academics have maybe a narcissistic and also like a fetishistic relationship to time and to knowledge that we just don't have time. We do not have time for anymore. So I'm not quite sure how to knock the scholars out of that habit, other than to just let the young people become radicalized by their circumstances, by reality, and just stand back and get out of their way.
Love that. That's so powerful, both of you. Yeah, the young people playing a really important role. And then, yeah, just the idea of, so the whole point is that, so eco-anxiety, eco-grief show us that our health is just intimately tied to the health of the planet. And so in taking care of the planet, we're actually saving ourselves, which is important. So I wanted to talk a bit more about the Anthropocene, and both of you talk about it. So Todd, you do in the Democracy of Suffering, and Caroline, you do in the chapter. So Todd, just sort of maybe explain what you mean by the Anthropocene condition. And I also like what you say, how Anthropocenity is the call to be useful, and by being useful to be responsible. So if you could maybe talk about both those, that'd be fabulous.
That's almost impossible, because I go out of my way to list many, many characteristics of what would be considered the Anthropocene condition. But the one quote that you just read back to me is kind of like a summation. For me, I guess, without looking at every single point that I make, what my main point is something like this. Life as we know it evolved over the last 10,000 years in something we call the Holocene, and it is involved in such a way that it is a best fit. That's what evolution means. And in that best fit, we have managed to basically create cultures and societies that allow us to almost fully ignore the existence of the environment almost altogether. That is the power of technology and of the Western way of doing things. And what we're having with the shift to the Anthropocene and the so-called condition is a sudden realization of the existence of the natural world or the environment itself, which is to say something that I could pretty much take for granted can no longer be simply taken for granted when it is doing things to us that we've never expected before. So all of a sudden it's like waking up to something else. And what we're waking up to is to a new epoch, it seems to me, and that would be the Anthropocene. So the main thing is just this capacity we now have as human beings to finally confront the fact that we are a part of nature and not separate and apart from nature. So that's the Anthropocene condition. It's the sudden arrival, rude awakening that we have to the reality of our animal nature, so to speak, and our dependence upon the environment as a totality, which, because of what we've done to it, is not so friendly toward us anymore in the way that it was under the conditions of the Holocene, which were much more peachy.
And do you think that the Anthropocene, like, when do you date that as beginning?
For me, I mean, there's all kinds of dates attached to it. For me, I make the date that is important. The Apollo images of the Earth, the whole Earth, and the blue marble, Earth. What's it called? Earthrise. Is that what it's called? Earthrise, I think. Earthrise, the picture, and the blue marble. These pictures are the founding moments of the modern environmental movement. And for me, the reason I picked those is because while you could pick any moment when we started burning carbon, or maybe the industrial age makes sense because that's when we really started burning fossil fuels the way we did. But for me, it's the important thing about it being a condition is the realization that we are living in a world that is suddenly different than it was before then. And something about seeing the whole Earth from space, insofar as it introduced us to the modern environment movement, also introduced us to the idea that it is one globe. And that's also coincides with the creation of a new word, which is globalization. And globalization is part of capitalism. And capitalism is, in fact, the primary driving force of climate change. So I just make it 1968 or 1969, something like that. And it's an arbitrary place to start it. But for me, it works because it's about the recognition of this moment more than it is about when it actually happened, which is almost of no consequence in some ways.
I was asking because I've heard different ways of thinking about the Anthropocene and when it started. But just as you were talking about waking up to our relationship to nature and reassessing our own inner nature and the animality of who we are, of what we are as human beings, it just reminded me of Romanticism. And I was just thinking about Bryn's background in that field. Obviously, the Romantics had a different relationship to nature and to industry than we do.
That's exactly how I see it, because I see, the counter-enlightenment is Romanticism.
Yeah.
And the counter-enlightenment includes important people for our era like Nietzsche and Freud. Mm-hmm. And I consider really postmodernism, obviously it's not Romanticism, but it has a kind of counter-enlightenment vibe that runs through postmodernism. And I think that we're still living in some ways with a kind of late romantic view of the world, even though it went through something called postmodernism. So I agree.
Yeah.
Bryn, what about you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's such an interesting time. So the relationship to nature, that sort of pantheistic view of nature where everything is God and divinity, and man is connected to nature through this divinity, and it's all in us. So that sort of, again, it's that epitome of this sort of interconnected world and how we're deeply interdependent and intimately tied to our world and environment. And it also leads to the idea of the current panpsychism. So that idea that consciousness is everything. So it's just kind of replace spiritual with consciousness. And it's the same thing, this sort of spiritual part of us or oneness that sort of connects us, that collective consciousness, and then becoming more aware of it. So you guys are talking so much about, again, like attuneness and attention and being present. And so that's what's so key is we also, as a result of the culture we're in, we're always stuck in that like default mode network where we're just thinking and thinking and thinking, and there's no time to actually breathe and be in the moment. And it's those moments where you kind of can sense that interconnection too. So yeah, all that stuff I kind of learned from Romanticism.